There were other shacks sitting quiet, swaddled by the fog along the edge of the river. The woman took them behind these dwellings, holding the lantern low. There were no windows in the back walls. The vegetation brushed up against the mildewed wood, forcing the trio to duck underneath. Claire assumed the woman had done this before, bobbing up and down between each limb, her footsteps silent, the lantern never scraping the ground. Would the inhabitants of each shack even rise from their slumber? After circling around these structures, Claire and Imala were always led right back to the edge of the river. The bank dropped back down to run level with the surface of the water. The flow was a constant trickle, almost something one would be able to put from their mind. Claire wondered if the fog was just as commonplace. The woman explained that this community, or whatever they were here, was in hiding. She lacked enough knowledge of the history of this country to know if they had been shunned by the rest of the populace, or if this location was settled out of choice, a natural process of like-minded individuals rallying together because of mutual disdain for the majority. She might have understood how they felt. After all, this woman spoke of practicing certain arts. She wondered, though, how Samson found this place. "Oi!" Imala shattered the chorus of frog and cricket song with a whisper. "We almost there?" Without looking back, the woman responded, "Almost." She kept the lantern near her feet, but she was letting it dangle from her grip. The surrounding fog glowed with the orange light. On occasion, some of it reached through and touched the surface of the water, reminding Claire there was a river beside them. She not only felt the moisture on her face, but it was like constantly pushing through curtains weighing down her cloak. Fighting back the urge to throw her hood back corresponded with her thoughts of protection every time. The other side of the river was hidden away, save for the times the accumulated moonlight reflected off the front wall of one of the shacks. Even then, the opposite bank was only assumed, along with the rest of those ghostly buildings. It wouldn't have been a surprise to find the only thing left standing was the one wall, like some carnival prop for a troupe of entertainers. How much of this river was inhabited? How many of these structures were still being used? Which part of this community had she and Imala arrived at first? Perhaps that one large building where those men were meeting was right in the middle of it all. With the way the woman had been sneaking upriver, she might have been leaving the community behind. Here on the outskirts, there was only a fog and the uneven bank. The vegetation had kept its distance, leaving them room to navigate the slush and occasional bed of rocks. It helped they had a guide, because even with the light from the lantern, the way before them might as well have been wide open. The woman never veered from her straightforward skulk through the fog. All around them was a dimensionless gray. The only limitations they were aware of was the ground under their feet and the forest to their left, which gave itself away with sporadic revelations of the ends of limbs that happened to reach far enough to catch some of the lantern light. When a body of orange swelled from inside the fog directly ahead of them, Claire almost froze in place. The woman pivoted slightly, altering her forward route to apparently circle to the left side of this object. As it grew to its true size, as some of the textures were mapped out under the lantern's haze, the woman realigned herself to walk straight again. The object stopped reaching toward the vegetation, but the other end kept going, disappearing into the fog's embrace. The woman had carried the revealing light with her, exposing a portion of the low-hanging limbs and the bushes underneath them to her left. Claire started to realize what they were passing by when the lantern light struck another surface, which sliced out across the river. This blade of orange cut upward in quick succession, like teeth upon a jawbone, and met its neighbor above. Both pierced the fog rolling just above the surface of the water, only to fade into the unknown. The woman left the wooden boat behind on the bank and headed toward this end of the bridge waiting ahead. Like the boat tied to a short post, like the shacks behind them, like the wooden piers hanging out over the water, Claire assumed that the state of this bridge was more the same. Yet, the woman made her way up the 2 steps, their material squishing underneath her feet, and then she started across. Claire listened to her footsteps, how the wood didn't creak or snap, not even groan, but it sounded like wet grass. Imala didn't hesitate and took the 2 steps up. Since she was wearing shoes with thinner soles, her footsteps didn't argue with the surrounding fog's barriers. The boards grunted under her first few footfalls, but then she put her training to use and was no longer heard as she followed the woman on across the river. Taking those 2 steps up, Claire felt them give under her weight. Forcing herself not to think on this, she placed her first foot upon the bridge. Then she was easing across, following Imala's form silhouetted against the dim orange glow further ahead. Maybe it was because Imala's presence was blocking a portion of the light, but Claire realized she couldn't even see the bridge under her. Its existence started from the woman and reached back, but as the rotted handrails passed Imala, Claire had to make herself believe they were still there. She couldn't even see the water trickling further below. There was only the fog threatening to erase her from the world just as it devoured everything 1 sense at a time. Here, suspended above a sound like water, making contact with some squishy surface, seeing only 2 people and pieces of a bridge, the mixture of absorbed moonlight and the lantern's glow caged her within a bubble with no distinct walls. She was glad Imala couldn't see her face, because she couldn't suppress the grin threatening to break into a full-on smile. A thought occurred to her then. If she would have glanced to the right for just a second, looking downriver, not seeing the water's surface, but would have been face to face with more fog, would she have felt a bit of vertigo? Reaching for the handrail, would she miss it and think it didn't exist? Then she would try to look ahead, but somehow be turned about, not looking down the bridge, but in some other direction. She would spin further to the left, trying to find the lantern's light, not knowing it was behind her. Crippled by the loss of certain senses, would she be cursed to haunt that bridge, seeing as the woman and Imala had already left, taking the lantern with them? She made sure to keep her head pointed forward the entire time. The woman dropped down, taking another set of steps, and then she met the muddy ground. The orange glow shrank with her, allowing the fog above to absorb more from Claire's sight. As Claire left the bridge and relished the feel of the muddy ground under her boots, the woman moved to the left. The lantern's light skimmed along the surface of something to the right and ahead, but the fog was allowed to roll back over whatever it was. Her attention caught. Claire paused, trying to peer through the surrounding gray, but the light was receding further. She tried to look down and find some indentations in the mud that hinted at a path continuing in the direction the bridge intended, but everything was lost to the moonlit fog. Imala had no questions. She just followed the woman who was descending a slope now. Claire caught up to them just in time for the woman to stop. Reaching down with her free hand, the woman gathered up a portion of her robe and lifted it, revealing her legs below the knee. She then took a measured step into a darker section of the fog, and her foot disappeared with a gurgle of water. She sunk up to the middle of her shin, steadied herself, and then brought her other foot into the water. The constant trickle of the river had become an effect without a cause. Claire wasn't aware another stream had branched off from the river here. Now she was forced to wonder why the woman had stepped off in it. Even Imala had yet to follow suit. They both watched the woman turn into the stream and start walking away. With each stroke of her legs going against the flow, the stream protested with a prolonged slosh. Imala bent down and hurried in pulling her shoes off. Then she slipped into the stream with barely a gripe from the currents. Claire sighed inwardly, knelt down, pried her boots off her feet, and then eased down into the stream. She thought the texture at the bottom would be like loose sludge, but was surprised when the bottoms of her feet met smooth stone. Making sure to hold the end of her cloak above the surface, she followed the other two. Now that she was looking ahead, the woman's lantern filled some of the space around them. This stream was only a few feet wide, and from what she could tell, either bank was a steep slope hidden under tall grass. Small trees were leaning out to meet one another above their heads, letting their limbs droop down into the orange haze. Bits of moss hung in curtains, forcing the trio to lean to either side. Claire didn't think this stream went any deeper than just below their knees, but the woman stayed as close as she could to the right bank without having the grass brush against her. She had also traded the lantern from her right hand to her left, which helped. Being able to see either side of the stream, they weren't exactly going into this part of the route totally blind. Claire didn't want to say anything, seeing as she might have had to raise her voice above the sloshing their steps were making, along with the trickle of the stream, but she wanted to ask the woman if this really was the way she had gone those times before. If there was some sort of path running parallel with this little branch, where did it lead? Were they avoiding another section of this community? What was the object waiting for them not too far away from the bridge? Another shack? She tried to play the instance back in her mind, but the glare had been too quick, and she hadn't wanted to get too far behind the others. Again, she avoided trying to glance to the right, hoping to spot another bit of a light source. Windows of a shack glowing from within, maybe even the surface of some structure, catching a stray portion of the lantern's glow. It would have been bad timing, because the stream was bending to the left. How far away was this source of water feeding into the main river? What else was out here? Were others of this so-called community really not aware of a nearby hot spring? Was it near this community at all? The woman mentioned they were close when Imala had questioned the distance. She was surprised Imala hadn't spoken up since then, seeing as they were still traveling in secret. The stream straightened back out, bringing them to a large root blocking their way. It reached away from the bank on the right and angled down until slipping under the water near the left bank. The woman stepped over to that side of the stream, sinking down only a few more inches in the center and then rising back up. Approaching the lower end of the root, she placed her hand holding the bundle of her robe upon the woody surface. Then she leaned upon it, lifting her left knee high out of the water, followed by her right, clearing the root, and then continued on. Imala and Claire were quicker in their movements over the root. The woman was staying to the left side of the stream now, holding the lantern in front of her. The lack of glare worked in Claire's and Imala's favor, because they saw the point of orange light at a distance ahead. From the way it flickered and bobbed, they could only assume it was a torch.